Eduardo Reeves had seen a lot of things in his life, but he'd never seen a horse pull 3 heavy wagons through a blizzard, alone. The snow was coming down thick, a white curtain that swallowed the world. It was already waist deep in the drifts, impossible terrain. But there it was, happening right in front of him. The horse was a giant, bigger than any draft animal he'd ever laid eyes on. Its muscles strained against a harness that looked like it was about to snap. Every step was a struggle, but it never stopped. It just kept pulling. The wagons were sealed tight, canvas tied down against the storm. But through a small gap, Eduardo saw movement. Not cargo, not supplies. Shadows, small shadows, huddled together in the cold. This wasn't a freight run. These were people, and they were traveling straight into the teeth of a storm that would kill them. Eduardo grabbed his coat. He didn't know who they were or what they were running from, but something told him that finding out would change his life forever. Eduardo Reeves pressed his face to the frosted glass of his cabin window. The wind howled, a lonely sound that usually didn't bother him. He'd been alone for 3 winters ever since Martha passed. The world ended at his fence line, and that's the way he liked it. But something was moving out there, a dark shape pushing through the swirling white. Too big to be a deer, too purposeful to be the wind. He wiped the condensation from the window, and what he saw made no sense. It was a horse, a beast of impossible size, taller than any draft horse he'd seen in 45 years. And behind it, straining against reinforced leather, were 3 covered wagons, moving in single file, through snow that should have been impassable. He grabbed his coat and stepped onto the porch. The cold was a physical blow. The massive horse moved with a grim determination, its head low, steam billowing from its nostrils. And beneath the canvas of the wagons, he saw them. Small figures, huddled together. Children, dozens of them. Who in God's name would risk children in a storm like this? They were heading straight for the mountain pass, a place that would be a frozen tomb by morning. He stepped back inside, grabbing his heaviest coat and a lantern. He didn't know who they were. He didn't want to know. But as he stepped off his porch into the knee-deep snow, one question burned in his mind. What were they running from that was worse than this storm? The tracks told a story that made his blood run cold. The ruts were too deep, the wagons were overloaded, and the horses' prints were enormous, each one a testament to the impossible weight it was pulling. He followed the trail into the trees, the wind tearing at him. That's when he heard the voices. Not casual talk, urgent, desperate. "How much further to the mission?" a man's voice called. "Father Miguel said it was just beyond the ridge." "Titan knows the way," a woman replied. "He's made these rescue runs before." Titan. The horse had a name, and it had done this before. This wasn't a desperate flight. This was a planned extraction, an old abandoned mission. Eduardo had heard the stories, a place for outcasts, for people who needed to disappear. He pressed on, the snow now falling so thick he could barely see. The trail grew steeper, and then disaster struck. The lead wagon hit a hidden rock. It slid sideways, teetering on the edge of a cliff that dropped into a black, swirling abyss of snow. A child screamed. The children inside scrambled to the high side, their small bodies a desperate counterweight against disaster. An older boy pressed himself against the wagon's frame, his face a mask of terror. A young girl clutched a crying infant, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Titan immediately dug in his massive hooves, pulling back, his muscles bulging, turning himself into a living anchor. Eduardo started to run forward, to help, to do something. But then he heard another voice from the wagons. "The men from the institution will be looking for us. They'll want them returned." Institution. The word stopped him dead. These weren't just families. They were fugitives. And he was now trapped in a blizzard, miles from home, with people who might be dangerous criminals. The wagon creaked, sliding another inch toward the edge. Eduardo looked at the terrified children, at the great horse straining against its harness, and he knew he had to make a choice. He could stay hidden and let them fall, or he could step out into the open and become part of their story. Whatever it was, he stepped out from behind the trees. "Let me help," he called out over the wind. The response was immediate. Guns appeared. From beneath the blankets, men and women produced pistols. their faces hard and wary. "Who are you?" A man with steel gray hair demanded. "How long have you been following us?" "Name's Eduardo Reeves," he said, keeping his hands open, visible. "I live down the mountain. Saw you were in trouble." "He could be one of them," a woman hissed, "scouting for Harrison's men." The gray-haired man, their leader, studied him. "He's a rancher, not a bounty hunter. And right now, he's the only help we've got." He looked at Eduardo. His eyes narrowed. "Help us. You ride with us. Stay behind. You freeze. But understand this. You've seen us. That makes you part of this, whether you like it or not." Eduardo nodded grimly and went to the horse. Up close, Titan was even more incredible. Scars crisscrossed his hide, and there was an intelligence in his eyes that was almost human. "On my count," Eduardo yelled. "3." He threw his shoulder against the horse, adding his own strength to the animal's impossible effort. With a groan of tortured wood and screaming leather, the wagon lurched back from the edge, settling onto solid ground. The children inside collapsed in relief. "Well done," the leader said, holstering his weapon. "I'm Samuel Crane. We owe you a debt." "What are you running from?" Eduardo asked, his voice blunt. "We're running to something better," Samuel said. "A sanctuary. These children, they're orphans. They deserve a real life." Just then, Titan lifted his head, his ears pricked, listening to something only he could hear. "They've found us," Samuel whispered, his hand going back to his gun. The sound of hoofbeats reached them, faint but clear, even through the howling wind. Harrison's men. They scrambled for cover, hiding the wagons behind a cluster of rocks. Eduardo found himself crouched beside the lead wagon. Through a gap in the canvas, he could see the children inside clearly for the first time. And what he saw made his blood turn to ice. The 10-year-old boy had thick, circular scars around his wrists. Shackles. His hands were covered in old burns. The girl beside him had similar marks on her ankles. And through a tear in her dress, he could see long, pale lines crisscrossing her back. Whip marks. A smaller boy was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. And a little girl, no older than 4, had perfect, rectangular burn marks on her forearms. Someone had held a hot piece of metal against her skin. Again and again. The voices of the riders grew louder. Harrison's orders were clear. Bring them back alive. They're worth nothing to him dead, but we need them working the fields come spring. Working the fields. It all clicked into place. This wasn't an orphanage. It was a slave camp. These children were being worked to death, tortured into submission. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was a rescue. And now it was his fight, too. The mission courtyard was a flurry of activity. Father Miguel, a man with kindness etched into the lines of his face, helped the children down from the wagons. They were met with warm blankets and hot soup. For the first time, Eduardo saw smiles on their faces. Timid at first, then breaking wide with relief. A 10-year-old boy who had been a stoic protector for the whole journey broke down sobbing when a woman wrapped a blanket around him. "It's real food," he whispered, "and it's warm." The little girl with the burn marks clung to Father Miguel's robes, shaking. He lifted her into his arms, murmuring to her in a language Eduardo didn't know, and carried her inside. One by one, the 12 children were brought into the sanctuary. 43, Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion as he stood beside Eduardo. "That makes 43 souls who have a chance to heal." The mission bell began to ring, its clear notes cutting through the storm. A sound of welcome, a sound of home. But their peace was shattered by the thunder of hoofbeats. "They found us!" Samuel yelled. "Get the children inside!" The courtyard became a blur of motion. The adults formed a protective circle as the last of the children were hurried into the main hall. Eduardo found himself standing shoulder to shoulder with Samuel, his own fear a cold knot in his stomach. Through the mission doors, he could see the children huddled together, their faces pressed against the windows, their brief moment of hope turning back to terror. "This isn't your fight, Reeves," Samuel said. Eduardo looked at the small, terrified faces. "The hell it isn't." Torches appeared through the swirling snow. At least 8 riders, their faces hard and cruel in the flickering light. They were here to drag the children back to their nightmare. And the small group of rescuers, outnumbered and exhausted, were the only thing standing in their way. The riders burst into the courtyard, guns drawn, expecting to find a small, terrified group of fugitives. They found something else entirely. Standing in front of the mission doors beside Father Miguel were two men wearing the badges of territorial marshals. "That's far enough, Harrison," one of the marshals called out, his voice sharp and clear. The leader of the riders, a cruel-faced man who could only be Harrison, spat into the snow. "Those children are legally mine, Marshal. I have every right to reclaim my property." "Property?" The marshal stepped forward. "Funny you should use that word. We've been investigating your orphanage for months. Amazing what a dying man will tell you." Harrison's face went pale. "Jeremiah Walsh," the second marshal said. "He told us everything before he passed. Described the shackles, the burns, the whippings, in great detail." "Lies," Harrison snarled, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Actually," Father Miguel said calmly, "we have more than just his word." He gestured to the mission doors. Several of the older children had come out, wrapped in blankets, their fear replaced by a newfound courage. "These children are the proof," the priest said. "Their scars, their stories." The boy with the missing fingers stepped forward. "He cut them off," he said, his voice shaking but strong. "Said it would teach me to work faster." The girl with the whip marks spoke next. "He beat us every day, said we were worthless." One by one, they spoke their truths. Simple, heartbreaking testimonies of a cruelty so profound it silenced the storm itself. The marshals listened, their faces grim. "We have a warrant for your arrest, Harrison," the first one announced. "Your farm is being seized." Harrison, trapped and exposed, made one last, desperate move. He went for his gun, but Eduardo was faster. He lunged forward, his years of ranch work giving him a speed Harrison never expected. A single hard blow, and Harrison was on the ground, his weapon skittering across the icy courtyard. "That's for every child you hurt," Eduardo said, his voice a low growl. The marshals took Harrison and his men into custody. As they were led away, the courtyard fell silent, the only sound the soft cries of relieved children. Father Miguel gathered them in the mission's warm hall. "You're safe now," he said. "This is your home." Eduardo watched them, all 43 of them, as they began to settle into their new life. He knew their healing would be a long road, but now they had a road to travel, they had a future. As he prepared to ride back to his own empty cabin, the little girl with the burn marks came up to him. She pressed a small, crudely carved wooden horse into his hand. It looked like Titan. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping us get home." Eduardo looked at the small carving, then at the children, then at the great horse Titan, standing peacefully in his shelter. He finally understood. Home wasn't a place, it was safety, it was love. And for the first time in 3 long years, Eduardo Reeves felt like he was finally on his way to finding his own. If this story of incredible courage and the fight for justice moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We share stories like this every day, and your support is what keeps this channel going. Thank you for being a part of this community.